Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate a path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. I'm so excited to be here today and celebrating our 50th anniversary episode. We've hit 50 episodes in 50 countries over the last 3 years.
Wow. I remember that this was just an idea about 3 years ago, a little bit less than 3 years ago, Kim, and we were just kind of thinking about, does this make sense? Is this something we should do? Are we going to have listeners? Are we going to have guests? And here's 3 years later with huge success, and proud to be part of this. That's been amazing.
Absolutely. So for this special episode, it's just going to be the two of us, no guests. We'll pull in some voices from prior episodes, but really we're going to take a moment to reflect on some of our learnings.
Yeah, before we even start, it's a big thank you to all of our guests that have been on our shows. And they have, I'm always humbled by how open-minded and how honest and willing and forthcoming, willing to share their successes, as well as some of the areas that maybe perhaps didn't go as well as they thought that they would want to go.
Great. We've learned so much about why companies succeed or fail, how they've thought about creatively developing data that's going to prove or disprove some of their thinking about their molecules. But data is really just the foundation of a lot of what we're doing in this industry. But it's developed by really great teams and thoughtfully curated by really great leaders. And we've had such a great opportunity to meet with so many of them here.
Yep, absolutely. It's really been a privilege. What we tried to do for this particular episode, we wanted to come up with not just a summary or a recap of these episodes. We want to come back to our listeners and talk about some of the themes that we've seen. We had CMOs, we have head of regulatory, we had head of medical affairs, we had CEOs, a lot of the CEOs from different organizations, CEOs that have a product already in the market, or maybe they don't even have a product in the market. So very, very innovative and making a difference and being pioneers in their field. So that's been very exciting. Yeah. So one of the first theme that almost every single person, everybody that we interviewed talked about was leading without certainty. You can imagine that these leaders in the biotech, especially being in an environment that is a lot of unknowns, most of them are tackling things that has nobody either talked about, or maybe others have done, but they did not have much success. And they're working in an environment that is very, very uncertain. And everybody talked about the fact that, if certainty is something that you're looking for, you probably do not want to be leading in a biotech. And their clarity and conviction was really something that kind of pulled them through during the tough times. As we all know, in biotech, certainty almost never exists. There's so many. The data may be incomplete. The clinical trial may not start at the same time. You may have, adverse events issue. Maybe the drug is not exactly working the way you want it to. Maybe there are manufacturing challenges. Maybe the agencies are coming up with new ideas or new way of doing things. So you just kind of have to be agile and kind of go with the flow and making decisions and go from there. This was really important to them. There's another thing that came up within the same context was the fact that people are not looking for certainty. They're fine. Your team members and even the stakeholders, physicians, patients, advocacy groups, they're not necessarily want you to be certain and have all the answers. But one thing they want is the direction. Right? One thing they want is transparency. They're not looking for you to have all the answers. They want to make sure that you kind of know what we know, right? You're communicating what we know. You're communicating what we don't know. You're also communicating what we plan to do about it and making decisions fast, even though some of these decisions may change. And it could even be, and some of them even talked about that, the fact that I made a lot of wrong decisions, but we were agile. We were quick to go back and course correct. I think that was incredibly important as well.
Yeah. If I could maybe add one key thing here, as we think about that point on clarity and conviction, where we are in our own journey of this podcast. We're, in the middle of 2025. We started 3 years ago. So in mid 2022, post the COVID epidemic that shut down the world. So when we talked to some of the earliest leaders in this show, they were coming off 2 years of complete uncertainty in the world around them, let alone in the biotech industry. And so when you think about some of those early episodes with guests like Suku and Niran, that we really talked about making hard decisions in a really tough environment where, if we remember where we were in 2020 and 2021, capital was relatively cheap. The industry was booming in some ways with platform organizations that were able to really test a lot of different things at once. But the floor kind of fell out from under them very, very quickly. And leaders had to figure out how to pivot and really hyper focus and create a lot of that conviction that you're talking about. So even just contextualizing a lot of the certainty and the lack of certainty that many leaders had, I think has been a really interesting learning for me as we've had an opportunity to speak to some of these amazing guests.
Right. That was very clear that you have to be comfortable with not knowing exactly how things are going to be a little bit down the road, right? And that's something that you just have to build that up and have a thick skin about that. Some of them talked about they built rituals like quick sprints, quick decision making, having red teams reviews, having meetings maybe 2 or 3 times a day that they had to kind of pivot, as you mentioned, into another area. And they were not afraid of making a wrong decision and change it a few days later. This was incredibly important to them, and that was very loud and clear in what they talked about. This actually brings us to the next theme that Kim, I'd like you to kind of talk about, and about the mission before the metrics. And that's really another important one that was definitely mentioned many times throughout these episodes.
We spoke to so many amazing leaders who really focused on the patient first. And in an industry that is, to your prior points, is very uncertain. We don't know what the future is going to bring. We don't know what stakeholders are going to be driving us toward, whether it's major capital constraints, whether it's regulatory shifts in, the landscape around us. It's so easy to kind of get lost. And it was a wonderfully consistent theme that we heard from so many of these leaders, the need to really think about the patient voice consistently and often, and reminding yourself why you're doing what you're doing, and how to create really amazing business cases for boards and investors on what it takes to really develop a drug, and the fact that the patient voice has to be involved early. We have to keep that patient conviction top of mind. We have to bring patients into the conversation. And so, we think about some of the guests we had. We spoke to Ed Kay, who is, the CEO of Stoke Therapeutics. We spoke to Jill Milnip from Astria Therapeutics. Both of those organizations have spent so much time bringing in the patient voice. Every company we spoke to, every leader we spoke to had so much clarity around the patient. Those just two came to mind as episodes where these leaders were staunchly focused on that, and it became a cultural element of how they built their organizations. And that's not necessarily a soft attribute. It's a hard one, and it's something that they've measured their organization by, even though there's not like a hard KPI to build off of.
That's exactly right. I mean, as easy as it sounds, right? I still see a lot of companies that they kind of lose sight of the fact that they really need to get the insights and the feedback throughout the process from the practitioners and from the patients as well.
I totally agree. Another episode that specifically comes to mind is one of the more recent ones where we met with the president of ITF Pharmaceuticals, Matt Trudeau, and we talked a lot about the DMD community. And that's one that I feel is such an interesting case study for the industry overall. We've had a number of guests over the years who have had assets really focusing on DMD. It's still a hugely underserved disease and an area of need in the industry. Great innovation, but we're not quite there yet. And that's an area that I find so fascinating because the DMD advocacy community has led with such a strong voice, has gotten so much attention, and has done an amazing job at putting, frankly, DMD on the radar for people to really pay attention and for investors to stand up and fund these amazing therapies. But that's one example. And there's thousands of diseases that similarly need that kind of advocacy and putting that patient front of mind. And so as we see some of these other leaders working in less known disease states and or areas where we don't have as strong of advocacy organizations, those are such ripe areas for this industry. And I'm so encouraged by some of the progress that I feel like we're going to see in the near future.
Right. No, I fully agree. And again, these are a lot of these leaders that we spoke to and a lot of other leaders that are out there in the biotech and emerging companies. Remember, they're doing something innovative. They're doing something that hasn't been done before. Or if it has been done before, it has failed and they haven't been successful. And they take the learning from those other trials or other paths that people have taken and kind of try to next it to the next level, which makes things even a lot more challenging. A lot of times they are the first, maybe second, or maybe sometimes third product coming to the market. Right. So it's not a clear path. There's not a clear path from an agency perspective. There's not a clear path from a clinical development and clinical operations and regulatory perspective. And they're really pioneers in the way they're thinking, and their mindset has to be that way as well. The sooner you start talking to your stakeholders and the patient advocacy groups and the patients, the sooner you'll kind of come up with your strategy and your plan to go and execute. The further down road it is, you're definitely gonna have surprises that you don't want to have, and it could easily would have been prevented if you would have just started that conversation earlier on.
Absolutely, and as we think about putting that patient voice first, it makes me start to think about what our third theme is, which is really focused on the role of the chief medical officer as kind of a power player, if you will, in an organization, and how we think about wrapping around them. Do you want to give us some thoughts on that one?
That is such a tough position. First of all, it's not just the title, the chief medical officer and the CMO office in general, because it's just not a title that you have and you have a few people. And most of these companies are so small. It's not like they have hundreds and hundreds of people in their team. So that the CMO is not just a title, it is an incredibly challenging position. And they're really the cornerstone, and they really truly understand the business of science, which is very, very important. Because remember, a lot of these biotech companies, they're in a stage that they still also have to have funding, and right, they have to go through multiple layers of getting funded. It's not like they have access to hundreds of billions of dollars, and if they make a mistake or if they're not doing the right thing, they can go back and fix it. So a lot of pressure on them. Right. And different CMOs at a different stage of the company may have to act very differently. At the beginning, they may have to be very focused on the clinical development, and as the organization or as the clinical trial have some data, they have to start building the organization and focusing in other areas. You have to be great with the investors and tell the right story to the investors and with clarity, even though there are uncertainties, just what we talked about. You're basically in front of the board on a monthly or quarterly basis. And at the same time, they have to make sure that, different functions that are in their group that are also leaders, and they have to build that up as an organization, such as the medical affairs, the regulatory affairs, clinical development, clinical operations. At the beginning, they're probably doing all of that work themselves, right, with the CSO of the company. And then as they grow a little bit, right, they need to have help that they can pull these things through. The successful one thing that I heard over and over again, they are able to think across the enterprise. Right? They're not there just to execute on the clinical trial and making sure that, the regulatory pathway is clear. All of those are given, but they're thinking from a business perspective. They're thinking from an investor perspective. They're actually thinking early on from a payer and reimbursement perspective, even before they have any patients, even in this study. So they are able to think from all different angles in a very holistic manner. And that's why it makes these positions incredibly difficult and challenging.
We have talked to so many great leaders, and as you were discussing some of the challenges, I can't help but get the visual out of my mind that Steve Zelenkowski brought up, which is the octopus and the role of the octopus. And I feel like it's becoming our unofficial mascot as this show evolves, but it's so true that there's so many different jobs and so many balls being juggled at any given point in time. There's not a one size fits all for this job. A phenomenal CMO can look amazingly different from one company to the next. And it's really about the right time and place and skill set. We've talked in a few episodes that medical device companies seem to do a little bit of a better job at finding the right CMO for the right time, where they really focus on, the trialist CMO, focusing on the early days of, study design and engagement with the PIs and the sites, versus, the quote unquote podium CMO, who is an amazing orator and talking about the science and getting in front of investors and KOLs and, fantastic late stage type CMO. Some people are fantastic at bridging both, and others have great skills with investors.
Right.
It really is such a personal skill evolution, and there's not a right or wrong. It's the right fit for the right time. And then recognizing, how do you build the infrastructure or the scaffolding around the person to fill, the other 6 legs of the octopus that need to get done, because we just don't have 8 legs. It's not possible.
Right. That is so true. The great CMOs that have everything that they do have, the 8 legs, are also, rare to come by, and they are probably in high demand, and a lot of other organizations wants them as well, and they have to also see if it aligns with their personal growth and the area that they want to get into. So it's not easy. It's challenging to find the right CMO that can actually lead a team and rely on their team, and also be okay with the fact that, these are the 2 or 3 areas that I really know very, very well. And there's 4 or 5 other areas that I know enough to know that I don't know enough. And I just need to have the right personality and right skill set in place. These CMOs are pioneers. They are building the path as they go, right? There's no playbook that they go back to. They're not recycling a playbook that already exists, and they go back to page 75 and look at to see, what do I do now? That doesn't really exist, and they have to figure things out. At that moment, everything goes so fast. They don't have a lot of time, right, to figure things out, which goes back to, you got to make decisions and be feeling okay with making a few wrong decisions, and hoping that your right decisions will outweigh your wrong decisions, and you move forward, and being able to attract the right talent and the right team as well. So that's definitely an area that everybody talked about.
Let's maybe shift gears a little bit into that 4th key theme about flexible talent and what that looks like. And when I think about the CMOs that I really feel have been incredibly successful, they're often the very low ego, low hubris, really open to recognizing that they don't have all of the skills all of the time. And even if they have a skill, it doesn't mean that they should be doing some of these things. And, taking off the hat, even though they've worn it many times before. It's not quite about building the biggest team. And a number of years ago, we maybe thought that it was about speed to build and how quickly we can get, all of the pieces filled out around us, but much more about the agility of the teams that we're building and how we create, the strategic conviction and the direction from that clarity point, but then enabling a really diverse set of skills that are able to deliver and execute in a flexible way, recognizing that biotechs have a lot of risk in the early days, that we need to get through some major stage gates to decide if we want to build at all, there is massive consolidation in our industry, and a lot of that is by design. But it also means that a really lean organization from a formal FTE standpoint can be just as valuable as a fully built out team if you have the right approach to how to execute and really thinking about those creative resourcing strategies to get the skills you need when you need them and de-risk some of that execution in your organization is truly a game changer for organizations leaning in.
Right. It's been really my own experience too on the industry side that, there was a time that that I thought, and a lot of people, quite honestly, around me, that resources will solve the problem. I just need more budget and I need more people. Then all of my problems will be solved. And you get that budget and more people and you're still dealing with the same problems. And maybe it's gotten a little better in certain areas, but it certainly did not, fix the issues that you were hoping to fix with more resources. And I see this something that people talked about all the time. The great leaders, CEOs, CMOs, head of all these different disciplines and functions, they find people that have been there and done that, and they have successful track record few times. They were not afraid to say, I don't have the resources. We don't know how to do this. I don't need a full-time person, but I just need somebody to kind of be that bridge gap to take us to the next level until we have more clarity, again, as we talked about, to be able to kind of take us to the next step. And that's incredibly important too for their success.
I totally agree. This might be a little bit of a hot take, but I do think it's pretty consistent with some of the things we heard. I would argue that your ability to be flexible and break down silos or avoid the development of silos is more predictive of speed in an early biotech and ability to be successful than your ability to build the team itself. We find that organizations that heavily over-index on pedigree and kind of building up with as many people that have, to your point, been there, done that, they need the experts at the table and they need people that have done it before to have that experience set, but they don't need to fill a room with 10 of them. There's a point where everyone starts butting heads and vying for their role rather than focusing on the end, which is how do we execute? How do we make sure this gets done? And being really thoughtful and strategic about that, designing and building with that flexibility in mind, I've found leads to much faster decision-making, much faster evolution of your clinical program, faster fundraising with higher yields, and your ability to meet those inflection points in a much more successful way. And so I really think this flexible approach and leaders who have kind of gone against the grain of a traditional org structure, which unfortunately kind of celebrates the idea of siloed decision-making and kind of separated governance. It works in big pharma, but it doesn't really work in biotech. It's much more about the integration and how do we operate as one team and focusing on the teaming rather than, the specificity of the individuals.
Right. We need to think across the enterprise. It's fantastic and it's great that we know and we narrow and we go deep in our own function, in our own discipline, and we have it all figured out. But that's not enough. You need to think about your other internal stakeholders in order for the team or the organization to win, and ultimately for the patients to win and the medical and clinical community to win. And that's becoming more of a change of a mindset. But I see more and more talking to some of my colleagues in the companies that, they're getting leaders in place that they can think beyond just their own function and their own role and what was in the job description, right? Because those are the ones that can actually really make a huge difference and incredibly important for the success of the organization, for sure.
Yeah, I think one point you made it previously that I'd love to just kind of quote or bring back here is that the ability to bring in or plug in the right expertise without a delay is the best lever for speed and resilience.
Right. And you know what? This is where we come, in my opinion, and this has been an incredibly kind of inflection point for my own career, is outsourcing and being able to kind of focus on, because that expertise you're looking for, it exists. It may not exist necessarily as an individual or as an FTE, but definitely as a fractional expertise. It's out there. You just have to find the right one and work with them to get you to the next step before you are in a point that you can bring in the the right person in.
I think that's probably most pertinent in this last section focused on strategic differentiators and how do we think about not just the resourcing array within the organization, but the capabilities and the functions that organizations are building and building to differentiate their business and their assets. So we think about quality, we think about safety, we think about real world evidence. And these are all levers that organizations can pull to differentiate from a financial perspective, from a competitive perspective, from a patient experience perspective. So do you have some thoughts on how that attribute has kind of played out in the conversations we've had?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that we kept hearing from the leaders that it was part of their success and also what they learned the hard way was that they did not think about safety and risk management early on within the context of what they were building. It was not really part of their culture. It was more of a compliance. It was more as an afterthought, and they had to. Some of them had to learn the hard way, and some of them learned from just watching other people kind of making these mistakes. That they had to think about this early on and use it as a strategic differentiator. Just what you just said. Same thing with real world evidence and data generations and evidence synthesis. It's most of these guys that were super successful in what they did that they start thinking about, well, after I get the product approved, what's going to be the data gap? What do the clinicians want to have? Because we all know that the clinical trial is trying to be as pure as possible to get the approval and get the product across the finish line. And that's incredibly important, without a doubt. That's the way it should be. But they started thinking about years before of what are the data gaps that they need to be thinking about now and what type of trial that they want to have even before the study gets approved or the product gets approved or comes to the market, or right after the product is approved and comes to the market, so they can have the additional data. The other thing, again, I keep going back to the payers. There are an incredible stakeholder in everything we do in pharma, right? And the payers are typically going to look at also to see not just what data that you generated in your clinical study, in your pivotal study, but also they're going to look at what is the day-to-day data that is coming across, and is the drug safe? Is the drug still being effective? Is the drug being used in this population versus that populations? And things like that helps them quite a bit to make the right decision, and ultimately, again, gets the patient is here that if we think right and we do everything, all of these things right in the right way, the patient is actually the winners here. A lot of these patients don't have another option there, or maybe if there is an option, is very narrow, then they don't all kind of qualify for that particular product that may already be in the market. So that's an area that the winners are bringing in the safety management, the risk management, the RWE, and data generation early on into the conversation and not after the fact.
I totally agree. I'm so encouraged by the evolution of strategic thinking, especially around RWE being an early aspect to start building in an organization, really in parallel to some of your confirmatory trials. And by doing that, leaders and organizations have been able to be so thoughtful about the actual risk profile of their drugs or their other therapies. They've been so thoughtful around what data is really going to move the needle for whether it's regulators, payers, even clinicians and patients that are really going to be the ultimate decision makers. We had so many different leaders talk about this idea that patient preference and maybe not being the first to market, but being the best in market or being the patient's choice when they come to market is also a strategic differentiator. And you don't just do that through another confirmatory phase 3 that checks the box. You do it by really being mindful of what the patient wants to see and hear and developing all of these additional studies and or mechanisms. There's so many creative ways to do it now without a prospective real world evidence trial, even those are obviously still gold standard. There's so many different mechanisms to be able to answer these really, really critical questions and further differentiate the asset and ultimately the business. It's good business all around.
Right, for sure. And you know what? The great thing is that the community accepts that. right? The community doesn't necessarily have to see hundreds of patients or thousands of patients and when I'm talking about the community, I'm talking about advocacy groups, I'm talking about the clinicians, the scientific community, and also the payers too, right? They accept it. And the investors also want to know that, okay, you're going to come to the market with this drug and this is going to be the narrow population that you're going to get approval on. But what about this whole other 80%, 90%, whatever huge population that your trial is not currently meeting their needs, and they want to hear what you're thinking after as well, and that becomes incredibly important for them too.
I totally agree. The area that we didn't speak about, but I think is an underlying theme, especially on this last point, and really enables a lot of the things we talked about, is the use of technology and other tools to allow for, whether it's RWE or other quality safety tools, et cetera, that have been really like impressively, prolific in the industry these days. The biggest challenge is kind of the data concept, garbage in, garbage out. And the widespread adoption of these tools is still fairly limited. We're seeing them, unfortunately, fall a little bit into some of the silo gaps. And so thinking about the enterprise approach to leveraging these tools to really differentiating your clinical assets and your programs, and then thinking about how do we optimize their use and use them across the team and really train people up. I see that as, I'm hoping, in the next 50 episodes, we really see an evolution of how tools are enabling all of the great work going on in our industry. Obviously, people are talking about AI left and right. Some organizations are really thinking about it very proactively. Others are cautious and afraid. That part of the industry is moving so quickly that I'm so encouraged that it's going to, frankly, just generate so many new assets and companies and opportunities that we can't even fathom today. And I think that's really the next frontier. If we can take these themes that these amazing leaders that we've had the opportunity to meet with can leverage these tools, the sky's the limit in terms of what we're able to do to treat really terrifying diseases. And I really hope that our industry is able to come with cures or preventions for that we've never seen otherwise. So I think that's one of the most encouraging things I see coming.
No, I agree. I was talking to a leader of one of the organizations that actually they were talking about. And so this is already happening, especially in a bigger pharma that they have the budget and the resources that they can throw at this. But one thing that he was talking about is that how they're using AI as a predictive analysis to be able to identify the right primary endpoint and the secondary endpoint in clinical trials, and to increase the probability of success of the particular study, right? And they use the big data to be able to kind of come up with some of the solutions or suggestions that, from a human perspective, it may be almost impossible to be able to do, or takes a lot of time, or you have to have all the great minds together to be able even discuss that or bring it together. And that's just one example of how it can be used to help to get the drug out there for the patients.
I couldn't agree more. There's so much potential ahead of us. We've learned so much from the last 50 episodes. We talked, today about this clarity and conviction in times of uncertainty. Hopefully we don't have as many notable times of uncertainty in our next run of 50 episodes. We talked about, building with a patient in mind, that's mission before metrics. This concept of the role of the role of the chief medical officer, the medical office, and how hard that role is. I was about to say, the medical office octopus, which will always be top of mind for me. I can't get over it. I
love that.
The requirement for agility as you think about your teams, and you had kind of made the statement, agility wins and silos stall. I thought that was, a really, really valuable way of thinking about it.
Right. No, I fully agree. One thing that was very apparent to me is that I couldn't put my finger on any one thing, except that it's all about the mindset that these leaders have, right? And it's not so much about their experience and their strength. And we all have those. And in certain areas, we are very strong. In some other areas, we don't. But these leaders, they had the mindset to find the solution. They had the mindset to reach out to the right, the right talent, to right people that actually can help them to get things done, as opposed to being in their own silos and getting things done and only focusing what was in front of them. Their mindset was to think about the company and across the enterprise. Their mindset was about the patient. Their mindset was about the clinicians. They were not just there to run a study and meeting the metrics and the deliverables of that. And that was one of the biggest takeaway for me, that if you have the right mindset, you can always attract the right talent and get things done in the right way. And at the end of the day, it's great for the company. It's also great for the patients and the community.
I think that is a fantastic way to celebrate this milestone, to talk about some of the amazing themes that we've been able to highlight in these amazing leaders that we've spoken to. So, Ramin, thank you for making the time for this awesome conversation today. Thank you to all of the guests who have been part of the last 50 episodes, and thank you in advance to the next 50 that will help us celebrate our big 100, hopefully in the not too distant future. And really looking forward to all of the progress we're going to see in our industry.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.